welcome to another broadcast of Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers, Creatives and Artists Showcase. I'm your host, Mark Miller. Today, we welcome Ellis Amdur to the KLAW hot seat. He'll be talking about some of his books and his unique background. Hello, Ellis. How you doing?
Glad to meet you, sir.
We have a mutual friend by the name of Craig Jorgensen, who is also a very good writer and successful writer that I worked with when I worked with U.S. Customs and Homeland Security. So that's how the connection and how we managed to get Ellis here today. So you have several books here, and the book that you gave me was Little Bird and the Tiger. And starting right off the bat, because of a little blurb that you have in that book, what was the cause for you to decide at age 23 to relocate in Japan and stay there for 13 years?
So I got bit by the martial art bug when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And a kid who beat me up a lot, I heard he was doing karate.
Oh.
So I asked my parents if I could do karate, and they thought it was a really low-class activity.
Oh.
So I kept nagging, and my father finally got fed up. He drags me downstairs, pulls out a 2x4 about this big, and he says, "If you can break that with your bare hand, I'll let you do karate."
Oh.
And he thought I'd hit it once or twice and then give up.
Oh.
He didn't know his son. And I would get in the basement, I would put it between two chairs, unsecured, run all the way across the basement and smash my hand into it and then collapse in a pile of newspapers. And then do it again and again. And after about a week, I couldn't use my right hand.
Uh-oh.
And so we're eating in this little kitchen nook, and I'd sort of pull a sleeve over my hand, and I was eating with my left hand. You know how in the U.S. we exchange, right?
Exactly.
And I'm eating with my left hand, bumping my dad, and he goes, "Quit bumping me." And I'm eating continental. and then, "What's wrong with your right hand?" "Nothing." And so, of course, I had this catcher's mitt blue and black hand, and my mother gasped, and and I said, "I just did what you told me." So now she's mad at him.
Yeah.
And in the novels, the child is now rewarded with the karate lessons and all that. But my parents said, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
So 4 years later, not having done karate, I lost another fight. And my parents decided, okay, you can do karate. And it was just some guy in a backyard, really, right? Okay. But somehow I just got fascinated by martial arts. And I go to college, and of all things, I joined a Nation of Islam Kung Fu school because they needed one white Jewish guy on their team.
Did you write a book about that?
I have not yet.
Oh, you
not
got
yet,
to. That's
right?
Fascinating.
The instructor disappeared with the funds of the dojo. Then I go down to New York, and I was walking up to the headquarters school, which was, I don't know why I decided to walk 33 blocks in New York in the summer instead of take the subway. And I got tired, just wandered into a side street, and there was an Aikido school. And Aikido is a Japanese martial art. And I walked in, and honestly, I was ripe for a conversion. I'm a 19-year-old kid. No, excuse me, 20, 19. Anything cool that I had seen, I would have wanted to do. Right. And Aikido I just really loved the clean lines of it, and started training in that. Graduated college, I moved to New York, and I actually lived on the mat of a school for about a year. Just slept on the mat and trained all day. And then I wanted to go to Japan. So
you literally did some of the traditional activities that people talk about that everybody thinks doesn't happen, which is you actually slept on the mat at the dojo and cleaned it and all that good stuff.
Right, except my teacher was this guy, Terry Dobson, who looked like a demented biker, smoked a lot of dope. He was a slob. You go into his office and there was like new life forms growing in the unused coffee cups, right, and all of that. But at the same time, he had this passionate love for martial arts and all of that, and he inspired me. So off to Japan I went, and I thought I would go just for a couple of years, and found a couple very unusual, very archaic forms of martial arts that were practiced by foot soldiers in the 16th century.
Which form of jiu-jitsu or forms of?
Yeah, so one which is called Arakiryu, and actually a lot of the fight scenes in the books are based on what I learned.
Right.
The one was, I bet you could call it sumo with weapons.
Right.
So whatever you have in your hand, sooner or later things are going to get messed up and you're going to get close, and then you would get into grappling. And so it was kind of the roots of jiu-jitsu, but you always had a weapon in your hand. And so on the one hand, I was doing this very, very rugged school with a lot of just hard body contact. But simultaneously, I was studying with a 60-plus-year-old tiny Japanese woman who was teaching me a weapon called the naginata, which is a long pole with a curved blade on the end of it. And I attribute the fact that I didn't totally go off the rails to her. She was like my second mother.
Oh, okay.
And she had such moral weight that she kept me tethered. So
She was a little bit more grounded.
yeah. Well, the other guy was grounded, but in a different way.
You know what I mean by grounded.
Yeah.
That's true. But because I never stuck with one style long enough to get good at anything. Because I was always bouncing around, did sport judo and all that stuff. But my understanding was, like you said, what became jiu-jitsu was a samurai's ability to grapple with somebody when he had his armor on, and do damage, because punching the plated armor with your hand didn't have a big effect other than hurting your hand.
No,
so they learned all these ways of bone breaking and grappling and choking people out and things like that.
That was a large part of it. I mean, it's kind of bloody to talk about, but a lot of it was how to pin somebody and stab them.
Yeah.
It was combative arts for that time of history. Right. Some of it still is relevant today, but you get a window in how people lived and died in that period. In fact, the one school called the Arakiryu, for 3 months I trained in only one thing, and that was how to formally pick up this tray, which was on a little pedestal with a cup, and I would walk toward my teacher and serve him the cup, which he would take. And I had to have perfect etiquette and perfect posture. And then the moment he reached for the cup, I would practice killing him.
Ooh.
And the teaching was, this is how you defeat a superior swordsman. So it had nothing to do with sports or competition, it was survival. And the idea was you were trying to get indoctrinated into a mindset. Anytime I betrayed the slightest tension, I get smashed across the face. I was his last student, not surprisingly. And so this very traditional Japanese guy who really hated Americans ended up with a Jewish guy from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But what was wonderful about him was he felt the people taught him who didn't really want to teach him, because he was a city boy and he went in this real rural area, and these old men felt compelled to teach him because he was that intent on learning. And so even though this man had prejudices against this country, this culture, World War II, all that stuff,
Right.
because I was absolutely committed to learn and wasn't holding back, he felt he had an obligation to teach me.
Okay.
Right? So that was the initial kind of training and indoctrination I had. So it gave me this window into another world.
So starting there, then when did you decide it was time to start writing?
I started writing in 1980. And I started writing actually the first version of this book, Girl with the Face of the Moon, which is set in the 1870s in Japan. And it's really, it's almost a fairy tale, but it's not, in the sense that it's a changeling tale where a woman's child is kidnapped and then she tries to recover her child. But what happened is I got about 40 pages in, got nowhere with it. It sat on my computer, came back to the States in 1988. 1989, somebody broke in the house and stole the computer, and that was it.
Oh.
And I didn't think
It's floating around out there someplace.
Right. Somebody may publish it someday.
Here we go.
And I didn't think I'd be writing anything. And what happened is, when I came back to the States, went to Seattle U, got a degree in psychology, and started doing crisis intervention work.
Oh, okay.
And then that shifted to doing child protective work. And I found that what I was asked to do was do a lot of reports to court on the well-being of certain children,
right,
and if they were safe with the people that brought them up.
Yeah.
And what I realized is the judges didn't like reading these reports. The judges didn't like reading the reports because they had a language that I would call scientistic. Sounds like science, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And so they would generally leaf to the back, read the conclusion, say, okay, and what else do we have?
Bureaucratic speak.
Yeah. Well, it's a particular kind of psychologies, right?
Right.
I wanted the only way the judge could see the child was through the report. Because the child doesn't show up in court in these cases, right? And the only way the judge could see the people of concern as they really were, and not dressed up by their lawyer, was what I saw. And so the one thing, I always wanted to be very fair to the people I was interviewing, and I would tell them, anything you say, I'm going to not only listen to and report, but I'm going to have an opinion on it.
Right.
But I'm going to do that in a different type in my report, so your attorney can attack it if that's what you think needs. If you think I'm unfair to you, it's going to be right out there. But I tried to write these reports almost like a short story. So I wanted it to be literally, if you will, a page turner, that the attorneys, the judge, everybody would read every page and say, okay, now I understand these people. And that was literally, I must have written 5,000 pages easily over a 5-year period. And that taught me how to write. And from that, I now had a basis of writing. I wrote a number of books which aren't on this array, which are nonfiction. I wrote books on the history of martial arts. I wrote a lot of books on crisis intervention, how to talk to individuals who might be dangerous to you or that you may be caring for. So I did a lot of nonfiction, and then I returned to my ninja story. And started writing, and then started really emphasizing fiction.
What has been your reaction? Because this book is unique I would say in some ways, because it has this very female protagonist, and it's based on kind of I guess you call it a little known woman who was a sensei. So what kind of reaction have you had in the United States, and also I would say overseas in some of the more traditional Asian populations in reference to that kind of heroine and her whole story?
Well, I wish I were a bestseller and could give you a lot of information. I'm not.
Okay.
But the reaction has been really positive. I mean, it's such a story. And so my instructors, so two generations back, a woman who died in 1940 but was born in 1860. And for reasons we don't know, we had very little information on her. But when she was 13 years old, she was wandering around Japan with wooden weapons, challenging dojos for a place to sleep. If she lost, they'd send her on her way. and maybe she might be
Yeah.
injured. She might even worse. It's almost unimaginable. The level of, I don't like to use the standard throwaway words like oppression or whatever,
Right.
but Japanese society at that time was so restrictive of women.
Well, it was very caste oriented.
Very caste oriented, that's the first level. And then also, everybody had a role. And a woman's role was to serve her family. First her own family, and then her husband's family. And you have this young child, a 13-year-old, who just walks away from all that and succeeds. And then she's like found, and I actually found 2 newspaper accounts of this in 1890.
Oh.
She's on a stage with a bunch of weapons, and she invites anybody in the audience to come up and fight her. So we know that about her, right? We know that she lived alone and died alone, except I found this obscure reference in a guy's graduate thesis about another individual, and she's mentioned in a footnote. And there's the faintest of faint chances that she had a child out of wedlock.
Oh.
And in Japan at that time, if a woman had a child out of wedlock, one of 2 alternatives existed. She was a complete and utter outcast. Garbage.
Yeah.
Literally. Or the father would take that child, go to his own family and say, raise this
Right.
child, because the child was his.
Right.
And that was, again, this is just not even a rumor. It's just, could this have been?
Yeah.
And that was the basis of this character. That's all the information I had. So I had a wonderful opportunity to flesh out a character based on that.
Well, having started to read that and everything, because you do go quite in depth into the whole, like you said, the martial arts existence at that time in Japan. So I'm reading it, probably definitely not skimming through it like you do like science fiction or crime thriller or something, because you've got all that in-depth information in there and trying to figure out, like you said, the relationship of that woman plus the whole martial arts community. And then of course I'm to the spot now where you're talking about the government of Korea, which was at that time, Japan was looking, all of a sudden Japan was getting into that mode of we've got to expand, we've got to expand, we've got to expand, which led to basically the eventually wound up in World War II.
Yeah.
Because of that whole expansionistic movement and everything.
Yeah.
So that's, I found that very fascinating. And of course, you have the ability of then, when you have an action scene, you read it and you go into such detail because you're showing martial arts as to what would actually happen as opposed to Hollywood style,
Yeah. Yeah, it's, some of that is based on, when I lived in Japan, I had kind of, as I say, informal testing matches with people from other schools. And so some of that was my own experience. Some of it was observing other martial arts and all of that. This may sound like a bizarre statement to some people, but combative engagement is a conversation.
Well, yeah.
It's a dialogue. And the proof of that is if you watch 2 boxers fight, and it can seem very barbaric and all of that, in the end of the fight, so often they embrace.
Right.
Dare I say there's a kind of intimacy, because I reveal myself to you as I truly am, and you can't help but reveal yourself as you are in that engagement. And so I'm trying to portray this not as just an action scene, but as a kind of a dialogue between 2 human beings, very different, who get revealed in that. And then the other point that you were mentioning, there's a macro story over this woman's story, and increasingly you're going to read there's a young man who's the sort of counterpoint.
Right.
A young man named Umezawa, and he is speaking for all the men listening, he's a lot of us.
Right.
That there's a period of time where many young men want to be a pirate, want to be free, want to have adventures.
They want to do things their way, yeah.
And aside from doing stupid things ourselves, we are very vulnerable to the influence of powerful, manipulative people.
Yeah.
And so we have a contrast between this young woman who her intention is to be inviolate. She will never be under another person, particularly another man's power. And then you have a young man who's going to throw himself like the mountain men, very similar to that, throw himself into this continent and have adventures for the service of the Japanese Empire, which is intending to have their own manifest destiny, much like the Americans had done, 50 years earlier in history. It's
if somebody out there in the viewing public would want to get a hold of you or your books, how would they do that?
Well, my books, easiest way is to Amazon, look up my name.
Okay, looking for your name. Okay.
But I have a website, a book website, edgeworkbooks.com.
Okay.
That's edgeworkbooks.com.
Okay.
And there should be some kind of a link to reach me too if somebody's interested in this sort of dialogue.
I'll try to have my editor put a little link on there to try to so people can get a hold of your books and everything, and also get a hold of you, because I can tell we've got a lot more things we could be talking about in reference to the whole martial arts world and history, and we've only just barely touched on it, which I just find fascinating and everything. So I'm really glad that we could bring you here, and that kind of wraps up this interview and an episode of Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers Showcase. KLAW exists to assist all authors, artists, filmmakers, and creatives to create, publish, and market their creations to the general public. We charge no dues. We meet the first and third Wednesdays of each month at Spiro's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington. The official meeting starts at 7. I'm usually there earlier. If anybody doesn't want to stick around, has to come there later on, and they can come there and we can basically discuss what's going on. KLAW primarily also, in addition to helping people get their wares and artistic endeavors out to the public, we look for various venues where people can also participate, such as Blackberry Festival and the upcoming Kitsap County Fair. We have booths at both those places. The only fees that are ever charged are, of course, table fees to rent the space so people can bring their books or whatever type of artistic endeavor they have at that time to bring it there, and so the public can decide whether or not they'd like to pick up a copy of it. So if you look for Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers on Facebook, you'll eventually find us, and we'll usually list what's going on, and hopefully you can come to one of our meetings. This would not exist, though, if it wasn't for Bremerton Kitsap Access Television providing us the space and the time and the support to be able to film these interviews. And so I'm always beholden to them. In addition to that, my publisher, Blue Forge Press, also has a film division. They help with the editing and promoting and also putting these interviews up on Facebook. So even if you don't watch the television shows, which is broadcast Saturdays at 6 p.m. on Comcast Channel 12 and Astound Wave Cable on Channel 3. If you don't have cable television, you can find us on Facebook. Once again, we exist for the artistic community, the writing community, and the creative community here in Washington State. We appreciate your time you spend watching these shows, and we also want to thank Ellis over here for showing up today and in the KLAW hot seat. So with that, have a very pleasant afternoon and a productive week.